Hello and welcome to Once More with Feeling, Cell-0, the newest album from Apocalyptica. Now, once again, going into a bit of a interpretive side of things because it's a 99% instrumental album, but there are common themes and a running concept that goes throughout the album. It's based in the idea of sort of the God particle and how that makes up everything, and tying that into the idea of the X factor of music and how you can't really convey the raw emotions and the stories in just the pure sheet music, and it's got to be understood in how you listen to the music. That's the Cell-0. It also runs through the whole idea of humanity's capacities for both creation and destruction, how it can be quite amazing the marvels that humanity can create, but how much easier it is for those marvels to be destroyed through sheer hubris. These concepts were expounded upon by drummer Mikko Siren, so for one of those rare occasions I'm actually fully read up on what is the driving force behind the album instead of just trying to figure things out on my own steam. The whole particle side of things is partially represented in the design of the cover of the album, sort of the cello crumbling into particles, and you've also got on the back the same sort of thing with the skull and the headstock of the cello. You've also got the images of the band members sort of crumbling into cosmic dust. Though no references to Thanos in this. It's sort of, they've all been given the dust treatment, or the snap treatment as you could call it. But yeah, so with all that in mind, with the various rests and rhythms that are built up, and the ebbs and flows that run throughout the album, it does make things like the song titles and the overall soundscapes that are crafted make more sense. But you do get a general feel for sort of a destructive, crumbling nature in a lot of the songs. Like, going into it proper, we have Ashes of the Modern World. Now this has a very gradual, menacing build to it that kind of feels like a Voyage of the Damned situation, and the music as it ebbs and flows like the crashing of the waves against the ship. The slowing down of the music is very much like the deadness of the underworld taking a hold. All of this is emphasised by the war drum beats that are provided by Tommi Väinäkäinen. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. I apologise if I've messed that up. I am an Englishman with very little exposure to other languages' surname pronunciations. When it finally breaks, you really get this idea of an apocalyptic descent into hell being brought to the forefront, and you just descend faster and faster until you reach the shores of the underworld itself. It really does well as a powerful opener and gives you a good idea of what you're in store for the rest of the album. Following on from that, we have the title track of Cell-0. Now that has a really powerful, ominous feeling permeating throughout the track, and is reinforced by this sort of ebb and flow of variating tempos and intensities. It's one of the longest tracks on the album, but with good reason. It's really setting the stage for what's about to come subsequent to it. You have the appetizer with Ashes of the Modern World, and then Cell-0 is really giving you an idea of what the whole album is about. There's this very interesting stylistic refrain that runs throughout it that I'd be very intrigued to hear what people's interpretations of that refrain might be lyrically. I really like it as an instrumental. I just think that it would be very intriguing to see what people's ideas might be for the emotions evoked, because it really does give this idea that things are breaking apart, and you really have this strong sense of foreboding that I can imagine a lot of lyricists would like to play around with. From there, we have Rise, which brings the tempo and intensity down somewhat, and along with that brings forth this emotional intensity that is very earnest and longing, and you can kind of visualise it being used for a movie montage. Over the course of the song, you feel that there's a growing need to become faster, more aggressive and intense, but at the same time drawing back. It's very reminiscent of Devin Townsend Project's Key in that regard, in that you get this sense of, I need to test the waters, but I can't go too far with this. That pattern reoccurs throughout the song until sort of the last minute or so, when it finally it doesn't become dramatically faster, but it does up the tempo ever so slightly, and you get this sense of finally breaking free and, as the song title would suggest, rising up. After that, we have En route to Mayhem. Now, that is very intriguing for how it has a kind of Tool-like progression, in that it starts out rather downplayed, but quite unnerving, and then as it goes on, it becomes more ferocious. There's this layering effect that goes on with one of the cellos acting in a sort of air raid siren kind of sound, almost like a blitz is about to happen. The overall structure of it definitely brings forth this idea of absolute chaos breaking out, with this strange back and forth of calm, then ferocious, and then becoming ever angrier as it progresses. Overall, I'd say it's one of my favourites on the album, probably because it's combining two tastes that taste great together, as far as I'm concerned, because Apocalyptica have covered Tool before, so this whole idea of sort of them taking cues from Tool and weaving it into their own music, which I'm a great fan of both of them. I started out as a Apocalyptica fan, and then as I got older warmed up to Tool. I don't feel like I've said Tool enough. Tool, 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 Tool. I am a tool. But yeah, it is one of my favourites on the album. So from there, we have Call My Name. Now, this has a very foreboding, ominous sense to it, but it's quite difficult to pin down message-wise, because there's also a underlying current of hopefulness in a sort of space-agey sense. You almost get this feeling of something that would be appropriate for Babylon 5, because there is this general feeling of darkness in the universe, but at the same time there's this kernel, this slither of hope that something better can be made of it. The overall feeling of space aginess and sort of unknowable technology is emphasised through the inclusion of additional keyboards provided by Lasse Pirainen. Again, I apologise for my poor pronunciations, but it really gives this driving feel of something strange and alien that's going on in the background. After that, you've got Fire and Ice. Now that is a dramatic shift in tone and style, but it feels right at that juncture. It feels like it helps to fully round out the sound of the album. It utilises what are called Uilleann pipes and the weirdest pipes you have ever heard of, which, well, I think that kind of says it all, because they are very strange sounding, but they really work well. I'm because of how it's passed out, I'm going to guess that they were provided by Mr. Troy Denockley. That's the only other name that is being listed here. If I'm correct, then I'd really love to hear other stuff that he's done. If not, if you could say, if anyone knows in the comments, please say below. But yeah, it's very nice in how it changes the tempo and feel of the album for that song. And sort of, it's almost like a breaking of the chapters. The first 5 songs were part 1 or act 1, and Fire and Ice onwards were act 2. It alternates tempo, intensity, and the imagery conjured is almost like a preparation for battle that ultimately culminates in this epic fight, painting this idea of surviving tribes managing to fend off against the terrors of Armageddon and facing off against what has brought upon them this apocalypse. Next, we have Scream for the Silent. Now that really brings out a more contiguous feeling to the album and kind of feels like a collaborative effort between Apocalyptica and Within Temptation. Now, I will admit, for me, Within Temptation are a bit hit and miss, but if this was sort of a collaborative effort between them and Apocalyptica, it would be one of their amazing songs, which they do have a fair amount of. What's interesting about this song is that it variates between a more sort of syncopated rhythm and a more perfectly in time signature, and it really feels like there's this cool back and forth going on. Once again, this whole feeling is emphasised by Lasse Piranen's keyboard work. I really hope that more collaborative efforts go on with him. Because he is really pretty amazing stuff on this album. Second to last song on the album, we have Catharsis, which very much feels like an appropriate title. You definitely have this feeling of, over the course of the album, they've been building up these intense emotions and they're finally letting them loose. You've got sadness, fury, joy, and an overall need to be free. And it really works well as sort of the penultimate track for the album, because it feels like they're setting you up for the final blowout. And finally, we have Beyond the Stars. Now that song really does complete the album. It's very well placed. You do get this sense of both an apocalyptic end and a new beginning, emphasised by this is what I was talking about at the start, where 99% of the album is instrumental, but there's this one piece of narration spoken by Tom Fury, which reads, "From the ashes of the modern world, a new evolution will rise, one with better care and hope. Cell by cell, nature will heal itself. Balance of the earth is restored. Ignorance became our deadliest sin, as we didn't hear the cry of our dying planet. These elements of selfishness led to our own destruction. Man must be undone. 3, 2, 1, launch. Human is gone. Lost Somewhere Beyond the Stars, Good Night. So, I wouldn't have chalked Apocalyptica to being, well, some might argue that they're realists. I'd argue that they're more nihilists, but none the more for that. It's certainly a sort of, the planet will go on. It's us who are doomed. None the more for that. There is still a strange hope to it. And I kind of like that. It's sort of like, maybe not humanity. You could possibly see it as humanity is not necessarily finished outright, but certainly it cannot continue in the form it is now. But that is pure speculation on my part. I will just say that it's a great closer to the album, and overall, Cell-0, I would give a 5 out of 5. There are moments where the change up in tempo could be a bit jarring for people, and the change in style occasionally could also be a bit of a, people might not get along with that. But overall, this is a great album and a great addition to any Apocalyptica fans' collection. So yeah, definitely go out and get this. Next, for Once More With Feeling, I've got a couple of Patreon reviews to cover, and for other reviews going on, I've got a few albums that I meant to get around to covering last year, but due to ill health and various other things getting in the way, I didn't get around to them, but I'd like to cover them at least briefly in one of the upcoming episodes. That's it for this episode. Catch you next time.